London fog lay thick upon the city that autumn evening in 1892. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge, his violin silent for days. Then came the urgent knock. Dr. Reginald Hargrove, eminent surgeon of Harley Street, lay dead in his consulting room, a single capsule clutched in his rigid hand, face contorted in agony. Scotland Yard saw suicide by his own hand, overwork and laudanum despair. But Holmes saw a link, the faint scent of bitter almonds lingering where none should be, and a smudge of white powder on the dead man's cuff that spoke not of self-destruction but of malice. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The first link. I set down these events as they occurred in the autumn of 1892, when the fogs of London lay thick and choking over the city. The coal smoke blended with a damp chill, seeping into every room and coat. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes had grown restless. He paced before the crackling fire, drew short, impatient pulls on his pipe, and left the Stradivarius untouched in its case. The chemical apparatus on the table gathered dust, and the Persian slipper that held his tobacco sat empty on the mantel. Mrs. Hudson knocked and entered briskly. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes. Most urgent, sent by Inspector Lestrade." The visitor was Dr. Elias Thorne, tall and gaunt, dressed in sober black. He removed his top hat with trembling hands, his hair damp from the fog. The sharp smell of carbolic soap clung to his coat, cutting through the warm tobacco haze of our sitting room. "M.R. Holmes," he said, voice unsteady. "Dr. Reginald Hargrove is dead. Found this morning in his Harley Street consulting room. They call it suicide poison, but I cannot accept it. He was in fine spirits only yesterday, speaking of a paper for the Royal Society. There are things that do not fit." Holmes leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Things that do not fit, doctor?" "Be precise." Thorne described the discovery. The charwoman had found Hargrove at dawn, rigid in his chair, eyes wide, mouth foamed. A broken capsule lay on the floor. The police surgeon declared aconitine poisoning, swift, bitter, deadly. A brief note in Hargrove's handwriting read only, "Forgive me." Lestrade had already marked it as self-destruction from overwork and despair. But the capsule was not his, Thorne insisted. He kept no aconitine in stock, too dangerous even for severe neuralgia. And on his cuff there was white powder, dry, not dissolved. He was meticulous. He would never handle such a substance so carelessly. Holmes rose at once. "We shall examine the room and the body. Watson, your coat and bag." The hansom cab rattled through the fog, wheels hissing on wet cobblestones, the horses' hoofs clopping steadily. Big Ben told the hour in the distance, while fog horns moaned low along the Thames. The air tasted of coal smoke and river mud. We reached the Harley Street house, where gaslights flickered weakly against the gloom. Inside the consulting room, the smell of death was heavy. Bitter almonds mingled with a faint gunpowder-like tang, though aconitine was named the cause. Hargrove lay on a table beneath a sheet, his body cold as the marble slab. His face was frozen and rictus, lips blue-black. I felt the stiff texture of his starched collar, crusted with dried foam. Holmes bent over the corpse with minute care. He lifted the right cuff of the coat. A smudge of white powder clung to the rough tweed. He scraped it gently into an envelope with his penknife. Next, he studied the broken gelatin capsule, empty save for a trace of residue. "The first link, Watson," he murmured. "This powder on the cuff. Aconitine absorbs moisture quickly. It should have dissolved against warm skin, yet it remains dry and intact." Hargrove did not swallow it willingly. The capsule burst in a struggle. Powder spilled in haste. He moved to the desk. A half-finished letter to the Lancet lay open, the pen still uncapped, nib wet with fresh ink. He was writing when death came. No time to rise or set the pen down. The assailant was someone he trusted, someone already in the room. Thorne grew pale, but his practice was successful, his patients loyal. Who would do such a thing? Holmes paced before the empty hearth. Trust is fragile until tested. "Now consider the capsule again." He held the fragment to the gaslight. "Burroughs' welcome manufacture common enough. but observed the seal, a small tear, as though opened and resealed clumsily. It was tampered with before it reached him. I confess the meaning escaped me at first. The connection seemed hidden. Did you spot it before Holmes revealed it? Holmes drew thoughtfully on his pipe. The second link, the suicide note. Forgive me. The handwriting is not his. See the loop of the G, too wide, too flourished. Hargrove wrote with precision and economy. This is a careful imitation. Then came the third link. Near the chair leg lay a single fine thread of red silk on the carpet. Holmes lifted it with tweezers and placed it in his pocket. Not from his suit, not from the carpet. A visitor left this trace. We returned to Baker Street as dusk deepened, the fog now so thick it muffled the clatter of hansoms and the cries of newsboys. Damp newspaper scent drifted in with us. Mrs. Hudson had built the fire high. Warmth spread through the room, chasing the chill from our coats. By the hearth, Holmes reflected aloud. Do you recall the red-headed league case, Watson? A single speck of reddish clay on a trouser cuff led me straight to the bank tunnel they were digging. The earth remembers every step a man takes, as I told you then. Here, too, the cuff powder remembers violence. The capsule remembers tampering. The note remembers forgery. Link by link, the truth begins to emerge. I stared into the dancing flames. Then you are certain it is murder? Holmes gave a small, sharp nod. The first link is forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. The following morning broke cold and raw. A thin sleet mixed with the ever-present London fog, and the coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys hung low, stinging the eyes and throat. Holmes was already dressed and waiting by the window when I descended the 17 steps from my room. He wore his long ulster and deerstalker, and the bowl of his pipe glowed faintly in the dim light of the sitting room. Watson, we have much ground to cover today, he said, rubbing his hands together. The chain must lengthen before it can tighten. First, the source of the capsules. We took a hansom cab to Snow Hill, where the borough's welcome depot stood amid the clatter of carts and the shouts of porters. The air inside the warehouse smelled strongly of carbolic, leather straps, and the faint sweetness of medicinal powders. A clerk with ink-stained cuffs and a nervous manner examined the broken capsule Holmes produced from his pocket. This is from our stock, sir, the clerk said after consulting his ledger. Batch number matches a delivery to Dr. Hargrove's surgery 4 days ago. But, wait, this particular capsule bears a different imprint on the rim. It is from the previous month's run. Someone has substituted an older one. Holmes' eyes gleamed with that peculiar light. Link 4. Deliberate substitution. The poison was prepared in advance and slipped into his supply. Excellent. From Snow Hill we rattled south to Kensington, where Mrs. Amelia Crane, Dr. Hargrove's elder sister, kept a quiet house near the park. The drawing room was warm, the fire crackling cheerfully, but the air carried the faint scent of lavender water and fresh baked bread. Mrs. Crane received us in deep mourning, her hands twisting a damp lace handkerchief. My brother was troubled these last weeks, she told us in a low voice. Patients dying unexpectedly 3 in 1 month, all after routine procedures. He feared whispers of malpractice were spreading. He spoke of someone trying to ruin his name. Holmes leaned forward. Did he name anyone? She hesitated. He mentioned Dr. Thorne, though he said the younger man was loyal. But old Dr. Blackwood, he retired last year after Hargrove took many of his patients, bore a grudge. And then there was Nurse Evelyn Marsh. She left the practice suddenly 6 months ago. There were words between them. She claimed he had been careless in the operating theater. Link 5. Professional jealousy and a possible motive rooted in resentment. Mrs. Crane's maid brought in a tray of hot tea. The bitter taste lingered on my tongue long after the cup was set down. Our next call was St. Thomas's Hospital, where Hargrove had once been house surgeon. The long stone corridors smelled of carbolic soap, old plaster, and the faint metallic tang of blood. We found Dr. Langford, a former colleague, in the physician's common room. He spoke in hushed tones, glancing over his shoulder. Hargrove was brilliant but proud, Langford said. Made enemies easily. There was one case. A lady of means died after a simple appendectomy. Hargrove blamed the anesthetist for an overdose of chloroform, but some said the fault lay with Hargrove himself, wrong dosage of a supplementary drug. The family hushed it up, but the story never quite died. Link 6. A buried error that might have festered into motive. The fire in the grate snapped loudly as we rose to leave, and outside the cold bit through our coats once more. We made one final stop at the Southwark Mortuary, a grim, chill place where the stone floors seemed to drink the warmth from one's boots. The police surgeon uncovered Hargrove's body on the slab. The marble was icy to the touch. The smell of formaldehyde mingled unpleasantly with a lingering odor of death, bitter almonds and something faintly sweet. Convulsions were marked, the surgeon said, pointing to the rigid limbs. Classic aconitine. But note the stomach contents. Traces of Dundee cake. Quite recent. He must have eaten only an hour or two before death. Holmes bent close. Cake, sugar, and currants. A social visit, perhaps, rather than solitary despair. Someone shared tea with him shortly before the end. As the day faded and gaslights began to bloom along the streets, we returned to Baker Street. Rain had begun to fall, drumming steadily on the window panes and pattering against the glass. Mrs. Hudson had kept the fire burning high. The warmth was welcome after the cold rounds. Holmes stood before the hearth, pipe in hand, staring into the flames. "The links multiply, Watson," he said quietly. "Substitution of the capsule. Professional rivals nursing old grudges. A recent social meal. A history of questionable deaths in his care. The chain is taking shape, each observation connecting to the next." I sank into my armchair, feeling the rough tweed against my shoulders. "And the next step?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Tomorrow we test these links. Some will hold, others will shatter. But already the outline of the truth begins to emerge. Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. The third day dawned with a bitter fog that clung to the rooftops and muffled every sound in London. Coal smoke drifted in heavy layers, and the air tasted faintly of sulfur and wet stone. Holmes was silent over breakfast, turning the red silk thread from the consulting room between his fingers like a jeweler examining a flawed gem. At last, he rose abruptly. "We return to Harley Street, Watson. The room has more to tell us now that we know what questions to ask." The hansom set us down before the familiar door. The house stood quiet, curtains drawn in mourning. Inside, the consulting room felt colder than before. The fire had long gone out. The grate held only grey ash. The smell of death lingered stubbornly. Bitter almonds overlaid with the faint sweetness of Dundee cake crumbs still scattered near the chair. Holmes moved with purpose. He knelt by the desk and examined the carpet inch by inch under the gaslight. His fingers brushed the pile until they paused. "Here, Watson, another thread, black wool this time, finer than the red silk. And see, caught in the weave of the rug, a single dark hair, curled tightly." He placed both in separate envelopes. Then he turned to the small side table where a tea tray still sat untouched since the morning of the discovery. A half-eaten slice of Dundee cake remained under a glass cover, the fruit glistening faintly. Holmes lifted the cover. A sweet, buttery scent rose up, mingling oddly with the carbolic traces on his own hands. "Crumbs on the floor matched the slice," he observed. "2 plates, 2 cups. One cup bears a faint lipstick mark, pale rose. The other is clean." Hargrove did not take tea alone. I felt the smooth porcelain of the cup. It was still faintly warm from the room's residual heat. A woman, then? Or someone wishing to appear so? But the mark is genuine, recent, not staged. We moved to the bookshelves. Holmes pulled down several medical volumes and leafed through them rapidly. In one, a treatise on toxicology, a folded sheet of note paper slid free. It was a brief message in a feminine hand. "Tomorrow at 3. Do not fail me. Ian." "E.M." Holmes murmured. "Nurse Evelyn Marsh, whom the sister mentioned. She arranged a meeting here on the day of death." The chain grew stronger with each discovery. Holmes paced before the cold hearth, then stopped. Now the crucial link. He returned to the body, still lying in the next room on the examination table. With my assistance, he turned the corpse gently. On the back of the right hand, almost hidden by rigor, was a small bruise, fingernail-shaped, crescent, fresh, purple-red. Pressure mark, Holmes said. Someone gripped his wrist hard, perhaps to force the capsule to his lips. The struggle explains the spilled powder, the broken capsule, the threads left behind. He straightened, eyes gleaming. The major leap, Watson. Hargrove was not merely poisoned. He was overpowered by someone he admitted willingly, someone who brought cake and tea as a pretext, someone who knew his habits intimately enough to tamper with his capsules days earlier. I stared at the bruise. The connection, once formed, seemed inevitable. What chain would you build from these small signs, dear reader? Holmes drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the smoke culling upward in the chill air. Do you recall the case of the speckled band, Watson? A woman found dead in her bed, terror in her eyes, no visible wound. The mark was a tiny pin prick on the wrist, yet it told the whole tale of a trained snake, a bell pull that was no bell pull, and a stepfather's greed. There, too, the body itself spoke when the room seemed silent. A single pressure mark, a hair, a thread. These are the earth that remembers violence, just as clay remembered the tunnel diggers in another matter. Here the hand remembers a grip, the carpet remembers a visitor, the teacup remembers a woman. Link connects to link, forged in observation. The fog outside pressed against the window panes, and the distant clop of a Hansom echoed faintly. Holmes pocketed his finds. Dr. Thorne must be questioned again. Nurse Marsh must be found, and old Dr. Blackwood. His retirement may prove less peaceful than he hoped. We left the house as the gaslights along Harley Street began to flare against the early dusk. Rain started again, soft and steady, soaking the rough tweed of my coat and turning the cobblestones slick underfoot. By the time we reached Baker Street, the fire was roaring once more. Warmth spread through the room, chasing the chill from our bones. Holmes stood before the hearth, pipe in hand. The chain grows stronger with every hour, Watson. Each new observation binds more tightly to the last. Soon the logic will be unbreakable. I nodded, feeling the weight of what we had uncovered. And the killer feels the links already tightening about him or her, but not yet aware how complete the chain will become. The chain grows stronger. Logic binds. Chapter 4. Testing the links. The fourth morning brought a change in the weather. The fog lifted slightly, but a cold, driving rain lashed the windows of Baker Street. Coal smoke still hung heavy in the air, and the streets ran with black water. Holmes was already at the breakfast table when I came down, sorting through the envelopes of evidence we had collected. His eyes held a restless gleam. "Today we test the chain, Watson," he said. "Some links will prove strong, others will bend or break. We begin with Dr. Thorne." We took a hansom to Harley Street once more. The rain drummed on the roof of the cab, and the horses' hooves splashed through puddles. Thorne received us in the now empty consulting room. The body had been removed to the mortuary the previous day. The air still carried faint traces of bitter almonds and carbolic. Thorne looked haggard, his collar limp from the damp. "You have news, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes produced the note found in the toxicology book. "This is Nurse Evelyn Marsh's hand. You knew of their quarrel?" Thorne nodded slowly. "She left after an argument over a patient's anesthetic dose. She accused Hargrove of negligence. I thought it forgotten. Yet she arranged to meet him here on the day he died. Did you see her?" "No. I was at the hospital all afternoon." Holmes studied him closely. "Your coat sleeve, Doctor. There is a faint smudge of white powder near the cuff, similar to that on Hargrove's coat." Thorne paled and brushed at it instinctively. I handled some of his stock yesterday when tidying the dispensary. It must have transferred. Holmes gave a small nod. Possible. We shall see. Link tested. It held for the moment, but weakly. Our next call was to a small boarding house in Bloomsbury where Nurse Evelyn Marsh now lodged. The landlady, a stout woman smelling of boiled cabbage and wet wool, showed us to a cramped sitting room. Marsh entered presently, tall, angular, with sharp features and pale lips. Her hands were steady, but her eyes flicked to Holmes with wariness. He wrote to Dr. Hargrove. Holmes began without preamble, showing her the note. You met him the afternoon he died. She lifted her chin. I did. To demand a reference he had refused me. We argued. I left before 4 o'clock. He was alive when I went. The teacup with the rose lipstick. Holmes said quietly. Yours? I do not wear lipstick, Mr. Holmes. Never have. Holmes produced the cup from his ulster pocket, wrapped carefully. Yet the mark is fresh. Someone else drank with him after you departed. Or you are not telling the truth. She flushed. I left at once. If someone else came, I know nothing of it. The link bent under pressure. Her denial rang hollow. We left her standing rigid in the doorway as rain dripped from the eaves outside. We pressed on to Kensington once more, this time to confront old Dr. Blackwood. His house stood in a quiet square, gaslights already burning against the early gloom. Blackwood himself opened the door. A stooped man in his late 60s, eyes watery, breath smelling faintly of brandy. The sitting room was warm, the fire crackling, but the air held the musty scent of old books and damp curtains. You were at enmity with Hargrove, Holmes stated flatly. Blackwood snorted. He stole my patience with his modern ideas, but I bore him no malice. I retired honorably. Holmes drew the red silk thread from his pocket. This was found near the body. Do you know any woman who might have visited him that day? Blackwood hesitated. My niece sometimes wore red silk. She called on me that afternoon, but she did not leave the house again. Yet you live alone, Holmes observed. No servant saw her depart. The old man's hands trembled. She may have slipped out. Young women are headstrong. The link cracked visibly. Blackwood's niece had no clear connection to Hargrove, but the thread had come from somewhere intimate. We left him staring into the fire, the rain beating harder against the panes. Our final test came at the dispensary again. The same clerk met us, now visibly nervous. Holmes laid out the substituted capsule and the ledger entry. The batch mismatch, Holmes said. You handled the delivery. Who had access after it reached Harley Street? The clerk swallowed. Only Dr. Thorne and Dr. Hargrove himself, and Nurse Marsh used to collect orders sometimes before she left. Holmes leaned closer. And you, sir? You have a cousin who works as a porter at St. Thomas's. A man dismissed last year for pilfering drugs. Aconitine among them. The clerk went white. I never. But the stammer told its own story. The link shattered completely. Back in Baker Street that evening, the fire roared high against the storm outside. Holmes paced slowly, pipe in hand, the rough tweed of his dressing gown brushing the carpet. Thorne's powder smudge was innocent transfer. His hands shook too much for guilt. Marsh's denial was false, but she lacked opportunity for substitution days earlier. Blackwood's niece is a red herring. The silk thread came from his own housekeeper's scarf. He keeps it on the hall stand. The clerk's cousin had motive and access to aconitine, but no connection to Hargrove personally. He stopped before the hearth. The weak links have broken, Watson. What remains is stronger. Someone inside the practice, with knowledge, opportunity, and a deep grudge. The true chain begins to emerge. I poured brandy. The sweet burn steadied me. Then who? Holmes smiled thinly. Tomorrow we draw the net tighter. The quarry feels the pull already. Weak links shattered. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The chain tightens. The fifth day arrived with a sharp wind sweeping down from the north, rattling the windows of 221B and driving the last of the fog from the streets. Coal smoke still curled thickly from chimneys, but the air tasted cleaner, almost bracing. Holmes had scarcely slept. I found him at dawn standing by the fire, staring at the array of envelopes spread across the table like playing cards. The red silk thread, the black wool strand, the dark curled hair, the lipstick-stained cup, all lay in careful order. "Today the chain tightens, Watson," he said without turning. "We confront the one suspect whose links have not yet broken." Before I could ask whom he meant, a telegram arrived, delivered by a breathless boy whose coat dripped rain onto the rug. Holmes tore it open. From Lestrade. "Nurse Marsh attempting to leave London. Cab to Euston now. Come at once. The game accelerates." We seized our coats and hats. The hansom we hailed flew along Baker Street, wheels hissing over wet cobbles, the driver's whip cracking like gunfire. Big Ben struck 10 as we passed. The deep note vibrated through the damp air. At Euston Station, the platforms were crowded with travelers, umbrellas blooming like black mushrooms against the drizzle. We spotted Lestrade near the ticket barrier, short, ferret-faced, rain glistening on his bowler. Beside him stood Nurse Evelyn Marsh, pale and defiant, a small valise clutched in her gloved hands. "Going somewhere, nurse?" Holmes asked mildly. She lifted her chin. "To Manchester. I have family there. I owe no one explanation." Lestrade stepped forward. She booked the ticket under a false name, Merton, and this was in her bag. He produced a small glass vial, stoppered tightly. Even from a distance, the faint bitter almond scent reached us, aconitine in solution. Marsh's composure cracked. "That is not mine. Someone placed it there." Holmes took the vial, held it to the gaslight of the platform lamp. "Freshly filled. Label removed. But the stopper bears a faint fingerprint. Yours, I think. You prepared the dose after the first attempt failed." She stared at him, lips trembling. "I did not kill him." "Then explain the meeting." "The tea. The cake you brought as a peace offering. I wanted only to speak, to clear my name." He refused the reference. We argued. I left. Holmes stepped closer. "Yet you returned. After 4 o'clock. You slipped in through the side door, the one the charwoman uses. You brought more cake, more tea. And this time you brought the poison capsule you had substituted days earlier." Marsh shook her head violently. "No." A sudden commotion interrupted us. From the crowd, a tall figure in a dark ulster pushed forward. Dr. Elias Thorne. His face was flushed, eyes wild. "Leave her be," he cried. "It was me. I poisoned Hargrove." Lestrade seized his arm. Thorne struggled briefly, then sagged. "I loved her," he said hoarsely. "Evelyn." When she told me what Hargrove had done, how he ruined her career, I could not bear it. I tampered with the capsules. I forced the poison on him when she had already gone. I wrote the note to make it seem suicide." Holmes regarded him calmly. "A noble but unnecessary confession, Dr. Thorne. Unfortunately, it does not fit the evidence." Thorne blinked. "What?" "The pressure mark on Hargrove's wrist was made by a woman's hand. Smaller nails, crescent deeper on the left side, as though the gripper was right-handed and standing to the victim's right. You are left-handed. And the lipstick on the cup. Yours is a man's mouth, doctor. No trace of powder or color." Thorne's shoulders slumped further. Holmes turned back to Marsh. "You returned because you suspected what Thorne planned. You hoped to stop him. But you arrived too late. The deed was done. You fled in panic, leaving the red silk thread from your scarf and the black wool from your coat sleeve." Marsh began to weep quietly. "I saw him force the capsule. I tried to pull his arm away. That was the bruise. I ran. I thought if I left London, it would all fade." The chain had tightened around the wrong neck for a moment, but now it pulled taut on the true quarry. We escorted Thorne and Marsh to Scotland Yard in 2 hansoms, rain drumming steadily on the roofs. At the yard, Lestrade took statements while Holmes and I waited in a small office, smelling of old pipe tobacco and damp wool. A coal fire burned low. The warmth was welcome after the chill ride. Holmes stood by the window, watching the street lamps flare one by one against the gathering dusk. "Do you remember the case of the copper beeches, Watson?" A young governess lured to a house where every door locked from the outside, every window barred. Yet the key to the mystery was not the bars. It was the missing bell rope that had been cut short. The criminal forgot that absence speaks as loudly as presence. Here, too, Thorne's confession was too eager, too complete. He wished to shield her. But the physical signs, the grip, the threads, the untouched second cup told the real story. I nodded slowly. "Then the killer is still at liberty," Holmes finished. "But not for long. The chain tightens. No escape now. The chain tightens. No escape now." Chapter 6. Links to the past. The sixth day brought a deceptive calm to London. The rain had ceased, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under a pale sun that struggled through thinning clouds. Coal smoke drifted lazily upward, and the air carried the familiar bite of river mud from the Thames. At 221B Baker Street, the fire burned steadily. Holmes sat motionless in his armchair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half closed as though listening to some distant music only he could hear. A knock came at the door. MRS. Hudson with the Morning Post. Among the letters was a plain envelope addressed in a careful, unremarkable hand. No stamp. Delivered by hand. Holmes slid it open with his penknife. Inside lay a single sheet. "You are close, Mr. Holmes. Closer than you know. The past holds the key. Come to the old surgery in Whitechapel tonight, 9 o'clock. Alone. A friend." Holmes passed it to me without comment. The paper smelled faintly of carbolic and old leather, hospital traces. "Whitechapel," I said. "That was where Dr. Blackwood kept his original practice before he moved to Harley Street. Hargrove bought him out." "Precisely. The past and present are linked by more than memory. Tonight we follow the thread." We spent the afternoon in quiet preparation. Holmes examined the dark curled hair once more under his lens. Human male, dyed black, but showing gray at the root. Recent. And brittle, chemically treated. He reached for the Persian slipper and tamped fresh tobacco into his pipe. The strong Virginia scent filled the room, mingling with the warm coal smoke from the grate. As dusk fell, we took a hansom to Whitechapel. The streets grew narrower, gaslights fewer, foghorns sounding low from the docks. The old surgery stood on a crooked lane off Brick Lane, a narrow, three-story building with peeling paint and boarded windows on the ground floor. A single lamp burned behind the first-floor curtains. We approached on foot from the corner, footsteps muffled on damp cobblestones. Holmes rapped sharply on the door. It opened almost at once. Dr. Blackwood stood there, older and more stooped than when we had seen him last, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He wore a faded dressing gown over a shirt open at the throat. The hall behind him smelled of dust, old books, and the faint metallic tang of long unused surgical instruments. "You came," he said quietly. "Both of you." I said alone, "But perhaps it is better this way." He led us upstairs to a small consulting room lit by a single gas bracket. Shelves held dusty bottles and yellowed casebooks. A low fire crackled in the grate. The warmth barely reached the corners. Blackwood sank into a worn leather chair. "I did not kill Reginald Hargrove," he began, "but I know who did, and why." Holmes remained standing. "Then speak plainly, doctor. The chain is nearly forged." Blackwood drew a long breath. 15 years ago, when I still practiced here, I had a partner, a young man fresh from Edinburgh, Reginald Hargrove. Brilliant, ambitious, ruthless. We shared cases. One in particular, a merchant's wife, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson. Simple gallstone operation. Routine. But Hargrove insisted on using a new anesthetic mixture he had devised, chloroform with an experimental adjunct. The dose was wrong. She died on the table. Convulsions. Just like Hargrove himself. I felt the rough texture of the chair arm beneath my fingers as I leaned forward. "You covered it up?" Blackwood nodded slowly. He persuaded me. Said it would ruin us both. The family accepted a private settlement. We moved on. But the guilt never left me. When Hargrove bought me out and took my patients to Harley Street, I retired here in obscurity. Until 3 months ago, when the rumors began again. Patients dying under his knife. Same pattern. Unexpected convulsions after routine procedures. I suspected he had returned to the old mixture. Holmes paced slowly. And you confronted him? I wrote to him. Warned him. He laughed, said I was a relic, jealous of his success. Then, 2 weeks ago, he came here himself, late at night, demanded I sign a paper absolving him of the Grayson debt, said he had kept records, proof that I had agreed to the dose. Blackmail, pure and simple. Blackwood's voice cracked. I refused. He left angry. That was the last I saw of him alive. Holmes stopped before the fire. Yet you have the dark curled hair from your own head, dyed to disguise yourself when you visited Harley Street recently. You went to warn him again, or to stop him. Blackwood looked up, startled. I went once, yes, to plead with him to retire. I wore a false beard, dyed my hair. But I swear I never touched the capsules. The motive fits, Holmes said softly. The means, you had access to a Conan years ago. You kept a private stock. The opportunity, you knew his habits better than anyone. Blackwood bowed his head. I did not kill him, but I know who did. Thorne! He worshipped Hargrove, then hated him when he learned the truth about the Grayson case. Hargrove confided in him. Arrogance, you see. Thorne decided to end it. To protect the practice. To protect Nurse Marsh, whom he loved. He came to me last week, asking for a Conan. Said it was for a patient. I refused, but he took it anyway from the old cabinet in the back room. The lock was never changed. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant clop of a laid hansom. Holmes drew upon his pipe thoughtfully. The past and present. One unbroken chain. Every link accounted for now. We left Blackwood in his dim room, the door closing softly behind us. Outside, the night air was cold, the cobblestones still wet. We walked in silence toward the main road to find a cab. Holmes spoke at last. Tomorrow we gather the threads. The complete chain is almost ready to bind. Past and present. One unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. The seventh morning dawned clear and crisp. A rare gift in late autumn London. The fog had retreated entirely, leaving the sky a pale, cold blue. Coal smoke rose straight from chimneys, and the air carried only the faint, clean bite of frost. At 221B Baker Street, the fire burned bright. Holmes had risen early and sent urgent messages by hand to Scotland Yard, to Dr. Thorne, to Nurse Marsh, and to old Dr. Blackwood. By 10 o'clock they had all assembled in our sitting room, Lestrade standing near the door, arms folded, the others seated uneasily on the available chairs and sofa. Holmes stood before the hearth, hands clasped behind his back, the rough tweed of his jacket catching the firelight. The room smelled of strong tobacco from his pipe, warm leather from the armchairs, and the faint carbolic still clinging to the medical men's coats. Gentlemen and madam, Holmes began, nodding to Nurse Marsh, the time has come to lay every link upon the table. The chain is complete. Let us examine it link by link, so that no doubt remains. He moved to the deal table where the evidence lay arranged like instruments on a surgeon's tray. First, the physical evidence links. He lifted the broken capsule. This was not from Hargrove's current stock. The batch number belonged to an earlier delivery. Someone substituted it days in advance. That someone had access to the dispensary after the delivery arrived. Dr. Thorne or Nurse Marsh, who occasionally collected orders. But Thorne's hands trembled too much for such precise tampering. His nerves would have betrayed him. Nurse Marsh, however, was steady, trained, and resentful. She had motive and opportunity. Marsh sat rigid, lips pressed thin. Next, the powder on the cuff dry, unmelted aconitine. It spilled in struggle when the capsule burst. The pressure mark on the wrist, crescent bruises from fingernails, was made by a right-handed woman standing to the victim's right. Nurse Marsh is right-handed. Dr. Thorne is left-handed. The match is exact. He set the capsule down and took up the teacup. The lipstick trace pale rose, fresh. Marsh admitted she wore no cosmetics, yet the mark is hers. She returned after 4 o'clock, bringing fresh cake as pretext and the substituted capsule. She forced it upon him when he refused her demands for a reference and threatened to expose her past accusations. Thorne started forward. No, she could not. Holmes raised a hand. Patience, doctor. He continued. Timeline links. Hargrove wrote to the Lancet at 3:45. Ink still wet. Marsh arrived shortly after 4. Blackwood confirmed she had been seen near Whitechapel earlier that week, collecting aconitine from his old cabinet, locked unchanged since his retirement. She prepared the dose there away from prying eyes. Marsh's shoulders began to shake. Witness links. The charwoman heard raised voices at 4:30, male and female. She assumed it was Hargrove and a patient. She left by the back stair. Mrs. Crane, the sister, recalled Hargrove mentioning Marsh's name with an ease only days before. Dr. Langford at St. Thomas's remembered the old Grayson death, the convulsions, the wrong dose, and noted Hargrove's recent cases followed the same pattern. Marsh had nursed several of those patients. She knew the signs. She feared exposure would destroy her forever. Lestrade grunted. Motive, then? Motive links, Holmes said. Simple and deep. Hargrove ruined her career with a false accusation of negligence after she questioned his anesthetic doses. He refused her a reference. Worse, he hinted he would spread word that she had been dismissed for theft of drugs. She faced ruin, poverty, disgrace. One final meeting to plead. When he left, she acted. The cake was to calm him, the capsule to silence him. The note, forged in haste, was meant to seal the deception as suicide. He turned to Thorne. You suspected her guilt. You tried to shield her with your false confession at Euston. Noble, but futile. The physical signs betrayed you both. Thorne buried his face in his hands. Holmes took up the final piece. The dark, curled hair. This fell from the false beard Blackwood wore when he visited Harley Street to warn Hargrove. Harmless, but it led us to Whitechapel, where the true history emerged. The Grayson death, the covered scandal, Hargrove's blackmail of Blackwood. All threads converged on one point. Nurse Evelyn Marsh, who had assisted in the Grayson operation, who knew the old formula, who kept silent for years until Hargrove's renewed arrogance threatened to unearth it all. Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant clop of a hansom passing below. Holmes stepped forward. Every link accounted for. The physical evidence binds her hands. The timeline binds her movements. The witnesses bind her lies. The motive binds her soul. The chain is complete. Marsh looked up, eyes wet but steady. I did not mean for it to end this way. He would have destroyed me. Lestrade moved to her side. Evelyn Marsh, I arrest you for the murder of Reginald Hargrove. She rose without resistance. Thorne reached for her hand. She shook her head gently. Blackwood stared into the fire, saying nothing. As they left, Holmes turned to me. A sad business, Watson. Ambition and fear forged a deadly chain. I nodded, feeling the warmth of the room suddenly oppressive. And justice? Justice is served when the last link clicks into place. No more, no less. Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in chains. The 8th day broke with a biting wind that swept clean through the streets of London. The sky remained a hard, pale gray, and the pavements glistened from overnight frost. At Scotland Yard, the atmosphere inside was thick with coal smoke and the sharp scent of carbolic from the cells below. I stood beside Holmes in a small anteroom while Lestrade completed the formalities of the arrest warrant. Nurse Evelyn Marsh sat in an adjoining chamber, hands folded in her lap, face pale but composed. Dr. Thorne waited outside in the corridor, pacing slowly, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Lestrade entered, wiping his hands on a handkerchief that smelled faintly of tobacco. It's done, gentlemen. The charge is willful murder. She'll be taken to Bow Street presently for the magistrate. Holmes nodded once. Let us witness the formalities. The chain must be seen to bind. We were led to the charge room. Marsh rose as we entered. She wore the same dark coat she had on at Euston Station, now creased and damp. Her eyes met Holmes' without flinching. You've nothing more to say? Holmes asked quietly. She shook her head. I have said enough. He would have destroyed me. I chose to destroy him first. Lestrade cleared his throat. Evelyn Marsh, you're charged that on the 23rd of October in the year of our Lord 1892, at Harley Street in the parish of St. Marylebone, you did feloniously and with malice aforethought murder Reginald Hargrove by administering him a poisonous substance, to wit aconitine. Do you understand the charge? I do. Two constables stepped forward. One produced handcuffs, cold steel that clinked softly in the quiet room. Marsh extended her wrists without protest. The metal closed with a sharp snap. The sound seemed to echo long after it faded. She did not flinch. Thorne, who had been allowed to enter, gave a low cry and stepped toward her. Evelyn. She turned her head slightly. Do not, Elias. It is finished. He stopped, shoulders sagging. The constables led her out. We followed at a distance down the echoing corridor, past iron doors and the low murmur of other prisoners. Outside, a black Maria waited in the yard, its black sides gleaming wetly under the weak sun. Marsh was helped inside. The door shut with a heavy clang. The horses stamped, breath steaming in the cold air. As the van rolled away, wheels grinding over cobbles, Holmes turned to Lestrade. The loose ends, Inspector? Lestrade consulted his notebook. The forged note. Her handwriting matches the specimen we took this morning. The aconitine vial from her valise. Traces in the stopper match the powder on Hargrove's cuff. The teacup lipstick. Chemical analysis confirms the same rose tint she carried in her reticule, though she denied wearing it. Blackwood's statement confirms she took the poison from his old stock 2 weeks prior. Thorne's false confession we discard as misguided chivalry. Holmes drew upon his pipe, the smoke curling upward in the chill yard. And the motive? Fully established. Hargrove's private papers, seized yesterday, contain letters threatening to expose her role in the Grayson death and her later accusations against him. He intended to ruin her professionally and financially. She chose murder over ruin. We returned to Baker Street in silence. The hansom rattled along the embankment. The Thames flowed gray and sluggish below, carrying the faint smell of mud and coal barges. At 221B, Mrs. Hudson had kept the fire high. Warmth flooded the sitting room as we entered. Holmes sank into his chair, legs stretched toward the blaze. Scotland Yard will take the credit, of course, he said dryly. But the chain was ours. I poured brandy. The sweet burn steadied my nerves. She showed no remorse. Remorse is for those who believe they had a choice. She believed she had none. Fear is a powerful forge. That afternoon, Lestrade called again, bringing copies of the statements. We reviewed them by the fire. Thorne had withdrawn his false confession and now faced only a charge of obstructing justice, likely to be lenient given his motive. Blackwood would not be prosecuted. His part was peripheral, his silence born of old shame rather than guilt. The sister, Mrs. Crane, had been quietly informed. She wept for her brother, but accepted the truth when shown the evidence. As evening fell, the gaslights outside flared one by one. Rain began again, soft and steady, tapping against the panes. Holmes rose and stood by the window, watching the street below. Every loose thread tied, he murmured. The criminal bound. The innocent cleared. Justice, such as it is in this imperfect world, has been served. I joined him at the window. A hansom passed, its lamps glowing yellow against the wet dark. Inside, life continued, people hurrying home, unaware of the small tragedy that had just closed. Holmes turned back to the fire. Tomorrow, the newspapers will carry the story. Harley Street poisoning solved by private inquiry. They will mention Lestrade, perhaps us in passing. But the chain itself, the logic that bound her, will remain our silent monument. I nodded. And what of Thorne? He will suffer most. Love is the cruelest chain of all when it binds the wrong way. The fire crackled. Warmth spread through the room, chasing the chill from our bones. Outside, London moved on, hansoms clattering, fog horns moaning in the distance. The great city indifferent to one more life ended and one more soul brought to account. The criminal bound. Justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. The ninth day arrived under a sky of pale winter blue, the first true cold of the season settling over London like a thin sheet of frost. Coal smoke rose in straight columns from chimneys, and the air tasted sharp with the promise of snow. At Bow Street Magistrates' Court the corridors smelled of polished wood, old paper, and the faint carbolic that clung to the black gowns of the clerks. Nurse Evelyn Marsh appeared before the magistrate in the same dark coat she had worn on the night of the arrest, hands still in irons, face composed but pale. Holmes and I sat in the public gallery beside Dr. Thorne, who had come despite the pain it must have cost him. Lestrade stood near the prosecutor's table, notebook in hand. The proceedings were brief but formal. The evidence was presented in summary: the substituted capsule, the aconitine vial, the forged note, the pressure mark on the wrist, the lipstick on the teacup, Blackwood's statement confirming the theft of poison from his old stock. Marsh entered a plea of not guilty, though her voice was low and without conviction. The magistrate committed her for trial at the Old Bailey. Bail was refused. She was remanded to Holloway Prison. As she was led away down the side passage, Thorne rose halfway from his seat, then sank back, face buried in his hands. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He did not look up. Outside the court the cold bit through our coats. Hansoms clattered past on the wet street. Gaslights were already lit against the early dusk. Holmes drew upon his pipe as we walked toward the Strand. The legal machinery turns slowly, he said, but it turns. The chain holds firm. The next morning brought news from the solicitors. Mrs. Amelia Crane, Hargrove's sister, had retained counsel for the estate. A quiet inquest was scheduled. The coroner's jury would hear the evidence and return a verdict of murder by person or persons unknown until the trial concluded. But the papers had already printed the essentials. Harley Street surgeon poisoned. Nurse in custody. Public opinion, fickle as always, turned against Marsh. The scandal of medical malpractice under Hargrove was overshadowed by the drama of betrayal and revenge. Thorne came to Baker Street that afternoon. He looked years older, eyes hollow, coat hanging loose on his frame. The fire burned high. The room smelled of strong tobacco and warm leather. Mrs. Hudson brought tea. The bitter taste lingered on my tongue. I cannot forgive her, Thorne said quietly, staring into the flames. Yet I cannot hate her either. She was driven to it. Hargrove's cruelty pushed her beyond endurance. Holmes leaned forward. She chose the path, Doctor. Many suffer injustice without turning to murder. But your loyalty was misplaced. You nearly broke the chain to shield her. Thorne nodded slowly. I know. I have resigned from the practice. The patients have scattered. The house stands empty. I shall take a post in the provinces, somewhere quiet. Perhaps in time the stain will fade. He left soon after, shoulders bowed against the wind outside. Holmes watched him go from the window. The innocent suffer longest, he murmured, but logic frees them in the end. 2 days later, we received word from the solicitors handling Hargrove's estate. The will was simple. Most went to Mrs. Crane, with small bequests to the hospital where he trained and to a charity for nurses fallen on hard times. Thorne received nothing. Marsh was disinherited entirely. Mrs. Crane visited Baker Street the following afternoon, bringing a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. She was dressed in deep mourning, but her eyes were clearer than before. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from her handkerchief. I wish to thank you personally, Mr. Holmes, she said. My brother's name is tarnished, but not destroyed. The truth has come out. The malpractice rumors were exaggerated. Most of the deaths were coincidence or poor judgment, not deliberate harm. The estate will settle quietly. The house will be sold. I shall move to the country. She opened the parcel. Inside lay a small silver cigarette case, engraved with Hargrove's initials. He valued your friendship, Dr. Watson, she said. He spoke of you often. Please keep it. I took it. The metal was smooth and cool against my palm. Thank you, Mrs. Crane. She left with quiet dignity. The future she faced was uncertain, but unburdened by suspicion. That evening the fog returned, thick and yellow, pressing against the windows of 221B. The fire crackled. Holmes plucked absently at the strings of his Stradivarius, a slow, mournful air that filled the room. I sat with the silver case in my hand, turning it over, feeling the worn engraving under my thumb. London was returning to its rhythm. Hansoms clattered along Baker Street. Newsboys cried the evening editions. Foghorns moaned from the river. The scandal would fade from the papers in a week or two, replaced by fresher sensations. The house in Harley Street would stand dark for a time, then new brass plates would appear on the door. Patients would return, trusting once more in the men in black coats and starched collars. Order was restored, not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough for the great machine of the city to continue turning. The chain that had bound a killer had also freed the innocent. Thorne from delusion, Mrs. Crane from doubt, the practice from lingering shadow. Blackwood would live out his days in Whitechapel obscurity, carrying his old guilt but no new crime. Holmes set the violin aside and reached for his pipe. The links are restored, Watson. The chain that broke one life has mended others. I nodded, staring into the flames, until the next shadow falls. Precisely. London never lacks for shadows. Outside, a hansom passed beneath our window, its lamps cutting yellow swaths through the fog. The city breathed on, vast and indifferent, its streets already forgetting the name Reginald Hargrove. Order restored to London streets. Chapter 10. By the fire at Baker Street. The 10th day after the committal at Bow Street brought a gentle snow to London, the first of the season. Flakes drifted past the windows of 221B Baker Street, catching the glow of the gas lamps outside and melting slowly against the panes. Inside, the coal fire roared high, sending waves of warmth across the sitting room. The air smelled richly of burning coal, strong Virginia tobacco from Holmes' pipe, and the faint sweet burn of brandy in the glasses we held. I sat in my usual armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, the silver cigarette case from Mrs. Crane resting on the small table beside me. Holmes lounged opposite, dressing gown open at the throat, violin resting across his knees. He had not played since the arrest, but now his fingers moved absently along the strings, drawing forth a slow, contemplative air, something from Bach, mournful yet precise. Mrs. Hudson had brought up a late supper. Cold beef, bread, and a pot of strong coffee. The bitter taste lingered pleasantly on my tongue as I set the cup down. The newspapers of the day lay scattered, headlines already shifting from Harley Street poisoning to fresher scandals in the city and abroad. The case was fading from public view, as all cases eventually do in this vast, restless metropolis. Holmes set the violin aside and reached for his pipe. It is over, Watson. The chain is forged, tested, and laid aside. Yet the method itself deserves reflection, does it not? I nodded. You have always said observation is the foundation, but in this matter the chain metaphor seemed particularly apt. He drew a long pull, smoke curling upward to join the shadows on the ceiling. Precisely. Let us examine it once more, not the facts of the crime, but the science of the deduction. Every mystery begins as a tangle of unrelated threads. A powder smudge, a broken capsule, a lipstick trace, a single hair, a pressure mark on dead flesh. To the untrained eye they are meaningless. To the careless observer they remain separate. But to the mind trained in logic, each is a link waiting to be forged into place. He leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The first link, the dry aconitine powder on the cuff, told of violence, not self-administration. A man who swallows poison does not spill it so carelessly on his sleeve. That single observation eliminated suicide and pointed to murder. From there the chain grew. The forged note betrayed deception. The threads on the carpet betrayed a visitor. The teacup betrayed companionship turned deadly. Each link strengthened the last. When one appeared weak, Thorne's eager confession, Blackwood's old guilt, it was tested and discarded. The true chain held because it was built on physical fact, not emotion or supposition. I sipped my brandy, feeling the sweet warmth spread. You always say, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Here the impossible was suicide, accident, or the hand of any outsider. What remained was the hand of one who knew him intimately, who had access, motive, and the nerve to act. Holmes smiled thinly. Exactly. Compare it to the speckled band, where a bell rope that was no bell rope and a ventilator that was no ventilator formed the chain. Or the red-headed league, where a speck of clay on a knee led underground to a bank vault. In each case, the criminal believed the deception perfect, yet forgot that the world leaves traces. The ground remembers footsteps. The body remembers violence. The room remembers who entered and left. Observation defeats deception because nature cannot lie. Only man can. And man lies poorly when confronted with the cold logic of fact. He rose and paced slowly before the fire, the rough tweed of his dressing gown brushing the carpet. That is the true power of the method, Watson. It is not genius in the romantic sense. No sudden flash of inspiration. It is patient, relentless accumulation. Data, data, data. One link at a time. Forge it with reason. Test it against contradiction. Discard the weak. Retain the strong. Until the chain is unbreakable and the quarry is bound beyond escape. I thought of Nurse Marsh in her cell at Holloway, of Thorne carrying his guilt into exile, of Mrs. Crane beginning life anew in the country. And the innocent, they are freed by the same chain. Precisely. Logic is impartial. It spares no one and condemns no one without evidence. Thorne's love nearly led him to perjury. Blackwood's old shame nearly clouded the truth. Yet the chain cut through both. Order returns, not because we wish it, but because fact demands it. Holmes stopped by the window, looking out at the falling snow. The flakes danced in the gaslight below. A late hansom clattered past, its driver muffled against the cold. London lay quiet under its white veil, the great city resting for a few hours before dawn. He turned back to me. So ends another case, Watson. Another chain forged in the fires of reason. There will be others. There always are. A knock at the door, a telegram in the night, a body discovered in fog-bound streets. Each time the same process. Observe, connect, test, conclude. The game continues. I raise my glass. To the next chain, then. Holmes smiled, a rare, genuine smile, and lifted his own. To the next, and to the listener who follows along, spotting the links before they are named. Did you see them all, dear reader? Or did some connections elude you until the end? No matter. The joy is in the forging. The fire crackled low. The snow fell thicker outside. Holmes returned to his chair, picked up the violin once more, and began a brighter air, something lively, almost hopeful. I leaned back, letting the warmth and the music wash over me. Until the next chain forges, dear listener, the game continues.